By the end of this video, when we pick up more than one item, right now we've got one in our slot, we pick up another, they'll stack and we'll get a number displaying how many items are in our stack. We'll pick up a couple potions. Now we've got 5 in our inventory. You can drop one at a time, so there we've got 4 and we've dropped another on the ground. Pick it back up, we've got 5 again. You can right click on these and they'll split the stack, and of course right click again and keep splitting our items out. You'll also be able to restack these by dragging them on top of each other and swapping them with other items in their slots. So cool, let's get stacking and splitting our items. First, let's go to our prefabs folder where I have my item prefab. I'm going to double click on this prefab to open it up, which you can see in our hierarchy. We now have our item open where we can edit our prefab and right click on our item and add a UI text. I'm going to call this QTY text for quantity text. And we use this to display our stack's quantity. So if we double click on this quantity text, we can see this better. I'm going to want this anchored on the bottom right. I'll set its width and height to be 40, its position to be -20 on the X, and the Y position to be 13. Then if I scroll down, I'm going to set its alignment to be on the right. I'm going to make it bold. And I'm going to set the font size to be something bigger, like 42. And I'm going to set the alignment here to middle. Actually move that up a bit to Y position 15 so it lines up at the bottom. Of course you can customize this whatever you want, but that'll do for now. Next, if we select our item and scroll down, and I'll collapse all these because we won't need them. But on here, what we do want to look at is this item script. So I'm going to double click on this item script to open it up. And in here we can add some new bits for our quantity. So let's go public int quantity and set this to a default of 1. And then I'm also going to want a private tmp_text for our quantities text. Hover over this and do using tmp pro. Now let's write an awake function, private void awake, where we can get our quantity text and set it to equal get component in children and pass in tmp_text. So we can grab the text from our item. Next, I'm going to write a public void function called update quantity display, where we can set our quantity text to equal. Now we'll use a ternary operator to say, is our quantity greater than 1? Question mark. If it is greater than 1, we'll set our quantity.toString, then use a colon to say else, have an empty string. So when our item stack is not greater than 1, we won't display this 1 on our item. We'll just set our text to empty, so there's no stack number. So cool, when we awake, we can call this update quantity display to make sure this is set correctly. And now we can add 2 new functions. That's going to help with our stacking. So a public void add to stack, and our parameter will be an int amount. We'll set this to a default of 1. So if we pass in nothing, it'll just up by 1. Well, we'll simply go quantity plus equals, which adds to our existing quantity, and then we'll add on amount. Then once again, we can call update quantity display. Then another function will want a public int, so we can pass back what was removed for remove from stack. And once again, we'll set a default of int amount to 1 for our parameter. Then we'll go int removed equals mathf.min. So as you can see, this returns the smallest of our 2 values, where we'll pass in amount and quantity. We'll then set our quantity to minus equals removed. Then once again, update quantity display, and then return our removed. Now for when we split our items, we're going to want to clone our item with a new quantity amount. So I'm going to create a public game object clone item with the parameter of int new quantity. And in here we'll create a new game object, which we'll call clone, where we'll instantiate this game object. We'll grab the item script from this clone item. We're going item clone item equals clone.getComponent item. Then we'll want our clone items.quantity to equal the new quantity that we're going to be passing in. And on this clone item, we can call .update quantity display, then return this clone. So when we split our item, we'll copy this game object, give it its new quantity, and then return it back for our script to use. You'll see how this is used later. But first of all, let's go back to Unity. And as we've added a new piece of data to our items, we're going to want to go to our InventorySaveData. So we'll double click on this and add in a new public int for our quantity, which will default to 1. So now if we've got stacked items, we'll be able to save this and also load it. Cool, that's all we need to add to the save data. Back to Unity. Let's exit out of our prefab now. And back in our hierarchy, on our game controller, we have our inventory controller. We're going to need to handle some of the item stacking in our inventory controller. So let's open this up. And as you can see, when we add an item right now, we look for an empty slot and place the item inside here. So when we pick up items, they look something like this. So before looking for an empty slot, I'm first going to get the item script. So I'll call item to add and set this to equal our item prefab that we're trying to add. .get component item. And I'll say if our item to add is null, we're straight up just going to return false, as what we're trying to add to our inventory doesn't have an item script. Now if we do have an item, I'm going to copy this for each loop as it's going to be similar and paste it above. But instead of looking for an empty slot, we're going to go around and check if we have this item type in our inventory. Everything will be the same with checking for a slot. However, we want to say if our slot's current item is not null, so we do have a current item. So change this double equals to be an exclamation mark and then an equals, which makes sure we do have an item in this slot. We'll remove this middle code here, as we instead want to say item slot item equals slot.currentItem.getComponent item. So we've got the item script out of our current item. Then we'll say if the slot item is not null to make sure we have found a script, and double ampersand slot item.id is equal to the item to add.id. So are these of the same type? If they are the same item, we're going to stack them, which we'll do by going slot item add to stack. As this has been added to our inventory, we can then return true. If we haven't currently got this item type in our inventory, it would then go on to look for an empty slot. So we can keep all this code the same. Very cool. Let's see if there's anywhere else we need to amend. So down next, we've got our get inventory items. We use this for saving our data. You can see we pass in our item ID and our slot index, which matches up with our inventory save data. Now we've got our quantity as well. So of course, inside this inventory save data, after our slot transform get sibling index, we'll go comma, quantity equals item.quantity. And I'm going to press enter a few times to tidy this up so you can visualize this a bit better. There we are, that's a little neater. So now we can save our items quantity. And of course, if we're saving this, we're also going to need to load it, which we do down in the next function, set inventory items. So before we set our slot's current item to be this item, and after we've instantiated a new item prefab, I'm going to go item component equals item.getComponent item. I've said item too many times so far. And we'll say if item component is not null, just to make sure our prefab did have an item script, and our data.quantity is greater than 1. As this defaults to 1, we only want to do this if it's greater than 1. So we can go item component.quantity equals data quantity, and then call our item component dot update quantity display. Cool, and for our inventory controller, that's all we're going to need, but there'll be one more place in our scripts that we want to change. So let's go back to Unity. If we press play and have a look at how this works right now, we've got nothing in our inventory. If we walk and pick up one of our potions, you'll see one enters our slot. It hasn't got any numbers on it, as we've only got one. If we pick up our second potion and check our inventory, we've now got 2. This stacks and drags around, and when we drop our item, we can't see that there's 2 here, but when we pick it up, we can see we get 2 back. If I go and grab an item from our chest, we get our potion here. If we pick these up, it now says 2. When we dropped 2 to begin with. So of course, dropping our items is currently broken, as we haven't added anything in our ItemDragHandler. So let's go back to Unity. If we click on one of our item prefabs, we can see our ItemDragHandler Script. Let's open this up and have a look. So all these top functions are fine, but it's on our onDrag event. We're going to want to check for stacking items. So in this top section, we're just checking our slots and grabbing them to store and use in a second. Now it's in here that we're going to want to add our stacking items. So there is a slot under where we're dropping, and we're checking if this slot has a current item. If it does have a current item, currently we're just swapping the items around. But before we swap them, instead I'm going to get our item, dragged item, to equal get component item, to get the item script off of the item that we're dragging. And then we're also going to want item target item to equal our drop slot dot current item dot get component item. So then we can check if our dragged item dot ID is the same as our target item dot ID. Then we can go target item dot add to stack and pass in our dragged items dot quantity. Then the slot we've dragged this from, so original slot, we're going to set the current item to equal null here, as we've dragged this item to be stacked with this new item. And then we're going to destroy this game object. as it's been combined into this stack, we no longer need this prefab. Then we can say else if these target IDs don't match, so they're different items. We can cut this swapping items code and paste it up in our else. So cool, that'll stack our same ID items. Let's scroll on down and see what else we've got. So when we've been dropping our items, it wasn't dropping correctly. So instead of dropping our items in one big chunky stack, I'm going to have it so we drop our items one by one from the stack so it decreases slowly. So first let's get the quantity of our item by going item equals get component item. So we can grab our script. We'll go int quantity equals item.quantity. And first let's find out if this is a stack of items. By going if quantity is greater than 1, then we'll go item.remove from stack, and this defaults to 1, so we don't have to pass anything in. So we've dragged and thrown one item out of our inventory. We're going to want to snap back the remaining stack. So we'll go transform.setParent and pass in original parent. We'll go get component rect transform.anchored position to equal vector2.0, which recenters our item back to the middle of that slot. And here we're going to set our quantity to equal 1, as we're only dropping one item. Before we go down, I'm going to stick emptying out our original slot current item to null into an else, as we only want to do this if our quantity is only 1. So now we're down to where we're instantiating our drop item. So for our drop item, we're going to want to make sure our item dropped item equals our drop item dot get component item has only dropped item dot quantity of 1. So we want to make sure our dropped item only drops 1 at a time, as when we were picking it up before, we were picking up 2 as it was copying from our game object. So that's our instantiating done. Now we only want to destroy this if our quantity is less than or equal to 1 and our original slot dot current item equals null, which we set this up when our quantity is only 1. So we've dropped the final item. That's when we can destroy our game object. Cool, so now our dropping and repicking up of items should all be good. Final bit we're going to add is our item splitting. To do this, at the very top, I'm going to add a new pointer click handler, which will go red because if we hover over, we need to do show potential fixes and implement the interface of on pointer click. We can click on this, and if we go down the bottom, you'll see this gets added in for us. I'm going to make it so when I right click on a stack of items, our stack will split and half of the stack will be moved to the next empty inventory slot. So let's go if event data dot button equals pointer event data input button right. So we've right clicked. I'm going to call a function to split our stack. You can of course make this whatever you want to split your stack. And down below I'm going to go private void split stack, and we can go item equals get component item. We'll check if our item equals null, or, which is the double lines, don't know what they're called on the keyboard, or item quantity is less than or equal to 1. Then we're going to return, as we don't want to split a stack of one item or of nothing. Next we'll go int split amount equals our item dot quantity divided by 2. We could check once again if our split amount is less than or equal to 0, we want to return, but this should have been caught by our previous check. Then we'll go item.remove from stack and pass in our split amount. So we remove half the stack from our original item. Then we'll go game object new item equals item.clone item and pass in our split amount. Now we need to find the slot to stick our new item in. Now we're going to need our inventory controller to find our next empty slot. Now every time we split an item, we could find our inventory controller object like this, but that'll mean every time we split a stack, we're going to do this find, which isn't very good for optimization. So instead, I'm going to go to our inventory controller script and I'm going to add a public static inventory controller called instance, which will go curly braces get private set, call an awake function, and follow the singleton pattern to make this an instance and accessible anywhere by going if instance is not null and instance is not this. We'll destroy this game object so we only have one inventory controller at a time and return. And outside this if statement, we'll just set instance to equal this. So back in our ItemDragHandler, instead of doing a find each time in our split stack, up the top, I'm going to set a private inventory controller, which I'll call inventory controller. And in our start, we can just set this to equal our inventory controller.instance. So cool, now we've got this. Down in our split stack, we can check to make sure we've got our inventory controller by checking if it's null, or if the new item we tried to clone is equal null. So that didn't work. Let's return out so this doesn't break. Else let's find our slot by going for each transform, slot transform in our inventory controller dot inventory panel dot transform. So each slot inside our inventory panel will go slot equals slot transform dot get component slot to grab its script. We can say if our slot is not null and our slot dot current item is null because we're looking for an empty slot, then we'll set our slots dot current item to equal our new item. Our new item dot transform will go dot set parent to equal our slot dot transform, and our new item dot get component rect transform dot anchored position will set to equal that vector 2.0 so that this is centered, and then we'll return. Outside the for each, if we don't find an empty slot, we'll return this split to its original stack. So we'll go item dot add to stack and pass in the split amount, and then we can destroy that new item. Cool, now we've got that split stack function done. We can copy and paste this up into our on pointer click, and guess what? Hopefully this all works and we should be done. Let's go back to Unity. Oh, and I've got an error, object reference not set to instance. Let's double click on this. It takes us to our update quantity display. Before this gets called, let's go if quantity text is not null, then we'll set our quantity text just in case it doesn't exist on our item, or if this hasn't been initialized in our awake yet. So cool, let's go back to Unity and test this again. Let's press play. Cool, I picked one up from our chest and split them out. We've got 3. Oh, and it's breaking a bit. So I'm gonna have to fix this and then come back to you. What is happening? Okay, so there's a problem in our onDrag end. Let's go to our script, and when we're dropping our items and stacking them, we still have this code. It's outside this if-else check, which is set on anything we ever drag and drop, as well as this anchored position that we're setting to everything. Instead of doing this to everything, let's move them so they only do it where they need to be done. So when we have different items and we want to swap them, we're going to want to take these lines of code, paste them in here, as well as this anchored position. For our swapping of the item, we'll also want them in this else, these 3 lines, where we move our item to an empty slot. Now we can delete these 2, so that doesn't affect our stacking item. And when we snap back to our original slot, we'll also want to set this anchored position line and remove it from the bottom. A little bit of confusing bug fixing there, so hopefully you can copy this and make sure yours looks the same. But now if we go back to Unity and press play, we can hoover up all these potions because it's looking kind of messy on our screen. Schlop, 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 hoovered up. In our inventory, we've got 5 potions. Let's stack them out. Goes to 2 and 1. You can stack them back to 5. Okay, I'm just randomly testing these to make sure it works. Cool. So we got 3. It goes from 2 to 1 and then out to 3. We'll stack them back up. Oh my god, I'm so glad that works. I was so worried when it kept messing up. Oh, I thought it was going to be something crazy. We can swap our items, we can do a whole load of stuff, and it all works. Thank goodness. And of course, this works with our hotbar. So you can stack and drag and split items from your hotbar as well, as these are all handled with the same slot system. But cool, in the next episode we're going to be adding in the beginning of our quest system, where we'll finally be able to accept a quest from this old man instead of just saying yes, we can help over and over again. Yes, I'm going to help you, old man, just wait a second. It's going to make our dialogue even deeper with conditional lines, where what our old man is saying is going to change depending on where we are in our quest. So cool, that's very exciting. Also, as we're getting quite a lot of scripts now in our game, I'll remind you to check out our Patreon, where with one payment you'll get access to all of our scripts we've ever written on my whole channel. And we've got quite a lot of videos now, so that's quite a lot of scripts. Or to save the hassle of putting it all together, you can grab this whole template with all finished features, as well as all future updates for free. So check it out. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!